Welcome to Twists and Turns Section 1. In this video, I'm going to show you all the techniques you need to know to knit Section 1 of Twists and Turns. Some of these techniques might be easy for you, and you may have done them before. So there's timestamps linked in the description box down below. So at any moment, you can skip ahead in this video and click those minute timestamps, and it'll zoom you forward to a further row or a technique that you're like, wait, Stephen, what do you want me to do here? What am I supposed to do? What are we knitting? So click on those timestamps, follow along at your own pace, and let's learn all about Section 1. We are going to work with the main color and contrast color for Section 1. So get your main color and contrast color. It doesn't really matter which one is which, but I would recommend there's going to be something really detailed that we want to see what's going on with the contrast color. So I would recommend taking your lightest color as the contrast color and your darker color as the main color. Or which color do you think would look really cool in like a really detailed, textury something later on? So if you do a really dark color for your contrast color, it might disguise that cool detail we're gonna do later with the contrast color. So again, main color, just get the darkest one. Contrast color is gonna be your lightest one. So if your palette is something like this, you've got your main color, contrast color, your accent color. We're gonna do the accent color later, okay? So for Section 1, you need the main and the contrast. What if your colors are like this? One's not really that much darker than the other. This is gonna be my accent color. So we're gonna work with main color, contrast color this week. It doesn't matter, but the lightest one can be your contrast color. Okay, we're gonna need needles, US 4, 3.5 millimeter recommended, or the size you need to get the gauge. If you haven't done a gauge swatch, then just do a tiny little garter stitch swatch just to make sure you're not too tight or too crazy loose. But go for the needles, and we're gonna need 10 stitch markers this week, okay? So get 10 stitch markers. If you don't have stitch markers, we can make some stitch markers by just breaking off a contrast piece of yarn, and you just tie it into a little knot. So if you don't have stitch markers, you can just make a little yarn stitch marker like this. So really quick, really easy with a contrast color. But yarn, main color, contrast, 10 stitch markers, let's cast on. Section 1, we're going to make an I-cord tail with the main color. Using main color, cast on 3 stitches using a long tail cast on. I have my yarn in the slingshot position, like this. Twist the yarn for the first stitch and cast on 2 more. You can use any cast on you like, really, but the long tail is great. Now slip those 3 stitches onto the left needle and then knit 3. Repeat that 124 more times. Slip 3 and knit 3. That's the first repeat. Slip 3 and knit 3. So you're always looking at the same side of the work, slipping the stitches onto the left needle, and then knit those 3 stitches. Whenever I knit my I-cord, I don't pull the yarn super tight. I just keep it nice and relaxed, not too tight, not too loose. Slip 3 and knit 3. As you're doing this, it's not necessary to count as you're doing it. Just make a long I-cord tail, and you can count the stitches later. So right now I'm looking at my I-cord tail, and I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm counting 6 rows, so I need to do a lot more. We need to do that until you repeat it 124 more times, which equals 125 total I-cord rows. Keep on going. I have 125 I-cord rows. Do a count, and as long as you have close to 125, you're okay. You can always do an extra I-cord row, but don't fuss too much about if it's the exact repeat, because we can sneak in an extra picked up stitch or skip an I-cord row as we pick up stitches. So I have my 3 stitches on my right needle. Row 1, right side, we're going to use the contrast color, so keep the main color attached. This is my contrast color, this light blue. Slip 3 onto left needle, and knit 3 with the contrast color. 1, 2, 3. Pick up and knit 7 along the I-cord edge. We're going to pick up stitches going this way. So I'm going to start by going into 2 legs of an I-cord row, like this. 1, 2, 3, get 7 stitches. If you hold the yarn in your right hand, insert the right needle tip into 2 legs of an I-cord stitch, wrap the yarn around, and pull it through. As you do this, try to go into the same stitch column. So this stitch right here will be picking up these stitches. That same stitch going in a column. My first 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Once you have 7 picked up stitches, turn to work the wrong side. Cast on 12 stitches using the cable cast-on method. Insert the right needle between the first 2 stitches from front to back. So you're going in that space between those 2 stitches. 1, 2, we're going to do that 12 times. Always go in between the first 2 stitches and place it on the left needle like that, and then go in between those 2. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. As I'm doing this, I'm not doing it too tight or too loose. You don't want those stitches to be super tight because we're going to knit them later on. Once you have 12 stitches, turn to work the right side. Skip the next 10 I-cord rows. I just went into this I-cord stitch as my last picked up stitch, so after that one, I'm going to skip 10. Skip 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So count 10 that you're going to skip, and that 11th one, that's going to be the next one you go into to pick up. So you're going to skip 10 and make sure they're in the same row as those stitches you were picking up before. And once you skip those 10, we're going to pick up and knit 15 stitches. So I just got the first one, 2, 3, 4. Keep going until you have 15. Once you have 15 stitches picked up along the I-cord edge, turn to work the wrong side. Again, we're going to cable cast on 12 stitches. 1, 2, 3. Once you have 12 new stitches cast on, turn to look at the right side. Again, skip the next 10 I-cord rows. So when we're looking at the I-cord, there's this one, you see how this stitch is pulled up a little bit? That little gap right there? That was the last one I went into. So this next one is number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Skip those 10 and go into that 11th stitch. So we're going to repeat these instructions between the asterisks. So we're going to pick up 15, cast on 12, skip 10. I need to pick up and knit 15, So follow the instructions closely, pick up and knit 15, and then you turn around to cast on 12, turn back around to skip the next 10. So you're going to be getting a repeat that looks like this. These big holes above those 10 I-cord rows. So follow the instructions closely all the way to the end of row 1. I'm reaching the end of row 1 right side, and I just cast on 12 and I skipped 10 stitches, so I need to pick up and knit 7 at the end of row 1. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. If you reach the end of your I-cord tail and you have extra I-cord rows on your tail, you could skip an I-cord row like that. Or if you don't have enough I-cord rows and you're reaching the end of it, you could go into the same one. You could just pick up a strand of yarn and pick up an extra stitch somewhere. So you can always sneak it in. You don't have to rip out if you're reaching the end of your row, because maybe you skipped an extra stitch or had too many I-cord rows, but you can always make it work. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, end with 7 picked up stitches. So this is what your row 1 should look like. You should have 137 stitches. You have 7 picked up at the beginning with the 3 I-cord stitches, and you have 5 of these big loopy gaps. We're going to do something really cool with those later. Once you have 137 stitches, turn to work row 2, wrong side. We're going to need our stitch markers for row 2. So get those stitch markers handy. All right, with the contrast color, we're going to keep that contrast color in the back. Row 2, pick up and knit 3 stitches along the I-cord edge. You can get any 3 stitches along this I-cord edge, but I start by getting the strand closest to my working tail of yarn. I lift it onto my needle and knit it. 1, 2, and dive in and get a 3rd strand of yarn. It doesn't really matter which strand. Just pick up and knit 3 at the beginning of row 2. Purl 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Place a stitch marker. Purl 1. Knit 12. Now we're at those 12 cast-on stitches that we did. Sometimes they're a little tight, so you can loosen them up. And I need to knit 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Purl 1 and place another stitch marker. So this is an important part of the section 1. There's 14 stitches between these stitch markers. Purl 1, knit 12, purl 1, place a marker. Now we're going to purl 13. Three, 4, 5. Once you purl 13, place a marker, purl 1, knit 12. It can be a little tight for those first couple stitches, so just pull them loose and knit 12. Here we go. So continue to follow row 2. Pay close attention to how many stitches you purl and where you're placing your markers. And as you reach the end of row 2, just do a double check and count your purls and your knits and make sure your stitch markers are in the right place. We'll be repeating the instructions in the parentheses 4 times. purling and knitting and placing stitch markers on either side at the beginning and end of those big holes. At the end of row 2, you need to purl 6 stitches and then slip the last 3 with the yarn in front. This is what the completed row 2 looks like, with all those stitch markers, 10 stitch markers placed. After row 2, row 3, we're going to set up and do some fun chevron shaping, and pay close attention to these first rows because we're going to start repeating rows and it's going to get easier and easier, but just pay close attention as you set things up. Row 3, right side, knit 2, slip, slip, knit. Knit 2, and then slip knitwise, 2 together through the back. That's the slip, slip, knit. Let me show that one more time because we're going to do that a lot for you right-handed English style throwers. Slip, slip, knit, knitwise, 2 together through the back. Knit 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Make one right. For a make one right, we're going to go and put that left needle into the back of that little strand of yarn, that little ladder between the stitches, and knit it through the front to twist it. Make one right. One more time, pick up that ladder. However you get it onto the needle, it needs to go like that, and then twist it by knitting through the front. If these make one lefts and make one rights are a little bit tricky for you, you can always substitute a make one right or a left with a backwards loop cast on, like this. So if this is easier, feel free to use this increase as a substitution. You could do this instead for every make one right and make one left. I'm going to do that make one right because it's really tight and tidy. After you make one right, slip marker, knit 1, purl 12. These 12 stitches between the markers right here are the 12 stitches above that big hole are always going to be in reverse stockinette stitch, looking at the right side. Purl 12. Knit 1, and you should be at your stitch marker. Slip the marker, make one left. For the make one left, that little ladder between the stitches, you need to put that left needle into the front of that ladder and twist it by knitting through the back for a make one left. Again, if that's too tricky, just do a little backwards loop cast on and that works to increase one stitch. Make one left, go into the front of that stitch and twist it. Knit 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, S2KP. We're going to slip 2 stitches knitwise, knit 1, and then pass those 2 slip stitches over for a double decrease. This is one of my favorite decreases. It's going to look so clean. After you S2KP, knit 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and make one right. I think about the phrase, I'll be right back. So this left needle goes into the back of that little ladder and then twist it. Slip marker, knit 1, purl 12. Keep on following the instructions for row 3. We have the increases and the S2KP decrease. Follow row 3 closely all the way until you reach the end. and you'll be working that double decrease in the middle between the markers here, and that make one right happens there, make one left. We'll be doing a make one right before the marker and a make one left after that marker. Follow row 3 closely. I'm at the end of row 3 right side. I just knit 6 stitches, slip 3 with yarn in front. We're going to do that at the end of every row. Slip 3 with yarn in front. Row 4, wrong side. We're going to bind off some stitches in this row to get a really cool effect. Knit 2, slip, slip, knit, purl 6, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, slip the marker, purl 1. Bind off 12 stitches using a knitted bind off. To do the knitted bind off, knit the next 2 stitches and then pass the first stitch over. We're going to do that pass 12 times. So I just passed that stitch over, that's the first time. Knit the next stitch and pass. That was the second time. Knit and pass, knit and pass. We're going to do that until you have 12 total passes. Knit and pass that first stitch over. And look at this, we have 1 stitch after the marker and we're binding off. We need to bind off 12 stitches. I'm reaching my stitch marker, and you might lose count of how many stitches you've bound off by this point. So I'm just going to tell you that you need to keep binding off until, so I'm knitting this last stitch before the marker, and I'm passing this one over, and look at that. I have 1 stitch remaining, and that's what you want. So basically, you have 1 stitch after the marker. I have 12 stitches bound off. You need 1 stitch before the other stitch marker. Slip the marker. So this is what you need to do. Every time it says bind off 12, you need 1 stitch after the marker, 1 stitch before the marker. It needs to look just like that. So let's continue. We just slipped the stitch marker, purl 13, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So you have purl 13 and slip the marker. If at any point during this knit along in section 1, if you don't have the right stitch count, if you're like, oh, I only have 12 or I have 14, you can always sneak in an extra increase or decrease to get back on track, okay? Don't rip out, it doesn't matter. Just sneak in an extra increase if you don't have 13, or sneak in an extra decrease. Purl 13, slip marker, purl 1, bind off 12. Another way to bind off, I love using this bind off where you knit 2 together through the back loop and place that stitch onto the left needle. So you can do this bind off as well if you find that this is quicker for you. Knit those 2 together through the back and place it on the left needle, and just keep on doing that until you have 1 stitch before the stitch marker. This is another bind off you can use if you like it. I'm reaching that second stitch marker. I'm calling this one my first stitch marker before this big gap. And I need to bind off 1 more stitch. And when I do that, I've got 1 final stitch before my marker, and then I can slip the marker. So whenever you have one stitch remaining, then slip that marker. So I just bound off 12. I've got a stitch marker, one stitch, and one stitch over there, and a stitch marker. I'm ready to purl 13. Follow row 4 closely all the way to the end of the row using any bind off technique that you like. I love that knitted bind off, or you could do that knit 2 together through the back loop bind off that I just showed here. They both look the same, so whichever one is easiest for you. You just need to make sure that your row looks like this. It looks funky, but just trust, we're gonna do something really cool later. I'm at the end of row 4. I just purled 6 after my stitch marker and slipped the last 3 with yarn in front. You should have 80 stitches on your needle after row 4, wrong side. Row 5, right side. We're going to use the main color, and when you're striping your yarns along the edge, carry the yarns along the edge and just drop the old color. So I finished the contrast color, just drop it and bring the new color up to work. Row 5, right side. When you work the first stitch, don't knit too tight. Knit a little bit looser, nice and easy, just like this. Row 5, knit 1, knit 2, slip, slip, knit. So I carried my yarn along the edge, and we're going to do that every time we use a new color. After you slip, slip, knit 5, 2, 3, 4, 5, make one right. Make one right. Slip the marker, knit 1. Cast on 12 stitches using the cable cast on method. To do this, we need to look at the wrong side. So look at the wrong side, the yarn is in back. We're going to cast on stitches by going in between. So dive in between those 2 stitches to get a new strand of yarn and place it on the needle. We're going to do that 12 times. This is number 2. Now go in between these 2 stitches. Number 3, number 4, 5. If you hold the yarn in your right hand, insert that needle tip in between the stitches, like this. Wrap the yarn around and pull it through. This is my 7th cast on stitch. 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Don't cast on too tight when you're doing that cable cast on. I have 12 stitches on my left needle now, and see how they're a little bit looser. You want them to be able to move on your needle so they're not too tight. After you have 12 stitches, turn to continue on the right side. I just cast on the 12 stitches, and now I'm looking at the right side again with my yarn in back. Knit that last stitch before the marker, slip marker. Now repeat all those instructions inside the parentheses, starting with that make one left. Make one left, and continue following the row. Row 5, follow all those instructions closely, working that center double decrease, slip 2 stitches knitwise, knit 1, pass the 2 stitches over. So follow row 5, and rows 6 and 7 use the same techniques I showed. So we'll be knitting and purling. Pay really close attention to your knits and purls, because with this main color, we're going to be knitting garter stitch. Knitting on the front and knitting on the back as well for most of the stitches. So follow rows 5, 6, 7, and 8 to get that main color in your section 1. Row 6, wrong side, knit 2, slip, slip, knit, knit 6, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Slip the marker. Knit 14. Knit 1. Whenever you have to knit those cast-on stitches, if they feel a little bit tight, you can give that first strand a little bit of a pull to open it up, and that will help you knit all 14 of those stitches between your markers. And again, at any time, if you're missing a stitch or you have one stitch too many, just sneak in an extra increase or decrease to get back on track. You should have 14 stitches between your stitch markers here in this open column. Slip the marker, knit 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, purl 1. So we're always going to purl that center stitch where that decrease happened to give that a nice smooth column on the right side. So we just purled 1, knit 6, and continue following the row. Row 6. Row 7, right side, knit 2, slip, slip, knit, knit 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Make one right, slip marker, knit 1, purl 12. So these center 12 stitches in this open column here, we're going to purl them on the right side to get these reverse stockinette stitch horizontal ladders happening. Purl 12, and then knit 1, slip the marker, make one left. I left the front door open, and twist that stitch for the make one left. After you make one left, knit 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, S2KP, slip 2 knitwise, knit 1, and pass those 2 stitches over. Make sure you still get this center column effect. Whenever you're doing that S2KP, we should have this single knit stitch column emerging to form that decrease line. Continue following row 7 all the way to the end with those increases and decreases. I just finished row 8, so I have 4 rows of my main color, and I have another little ladder of reverse stockinette stitch. What are we going to do with that? We'll see soon. It may help you to mark the decrease location. So something that helps me is I'll take a split ring marker and I'll just place it on the right side into that center stitch just to help me remember that's my centered decrease stitch. That might come in handy later when we're working with the main color. Remember how we had to purl that stitch on the wrong side? We always want this to be a smooth knit column, that center stitch in the decrease section. We're going to work the pattern repeat, starting with row 9, right side, using contrast color. We just finished the main color, so place that main color down. Bring the contrast color up as you change colors, really simple. Row 9 is the only right side row where there are no decreases. Row 9, knit to the marker, and we're going to do increases still on the right side. So do your make one right increase, slip marker, knit 1, cast on 12 stitches using the cable cast on method. We'll be doing this on the right side every time we start a new color. Casting on 12 to bridge that gap. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I do mine a little bit more on the loose side, just so it's really easy to slide those stitches and knit them later. Knit 1, slip marker. Keep on following row 9, working those increases and no decreases on row 9. We're going to get 10 increased stitches after row 9, so you will have 150 stitches. So every time you work row 9, you're going to get 10 more stitches added to your stitch count. We're going to have 150 after row 9, and then we'll get bigger and bigger sections as we expand the fabric with increases. 10 stitches increased after row 9. I'm working on row 11, and I just slipped my 2 stitch markers. And one thing you might start to notice is those stitches at the end of those horizontal bits right here. They might look a little bit loose, but don't worry about that. It's going to look fine once we do our magical little treatment to those ladders. But you're going to reach the instructions that say knit to 1 stitch before the center decrease stitch. So whenever you make one left after the marker, you knit to 1 stitch before the center decrease stitch. That's why these markers might come in handy to mark each of those center decrease stitches. It's that knit column. That's the center decrease stitch. You need to knit to 1 stitch before that stitch. So here we go. I marked that center stitch, that center decrease stitch. So that's the center decrease stitch. Knit until you're 1 stitch before it, and then you're ready to S2KP. So whenever you slip those 2 stitches knitwise, your needle should be going into that center decrease stitch and the stitch to the right of it. Slip 2, knit 1, pass those 2 over. This should always be the center stitch. So you should have an equal number of stitches to the left of it and to the right of it for that center double decrease. So that's why those stitch markers can help you visualize that, but some of you might be able to just look at your knitting and see that column to visualize where to do that S2KP. Now we're knitting to the marker and make one right. Keep on following row 11, and we're getting beautiful stockinette stitch with our contrast color. Stockinette stitch in that decrease section, and reverse stockinette stitch, those nice little bumps in that section where the holes are. So when you slip the stitch marker and you reach those holy sections, you've got to knit 1 and then purl 12. Follow the instructions closely, and it's going to get easier and easier the more you repeat the pattern repeat rows. But pay close attention to those knits and purls and the increases and decreases for these beginning stripes. I'm working row 13 with the main color, and it's really important to always know that there should be 14 total stitches between your stitch markers in those loopy sections right here, those horizontal strands. And I'm going to show you that S2KP once more. I just did my make one left, and I'm knitting to 1 stitch before the center decrease stitch. And that's where that marker can come in handy. Right here is where I need to begin that S2KP. There's that center decrease stitch. So I'm slipping those 2 knitwise, knit 1, pass those 2 over, and look at that, I'm looking really good. So my remaining stitch after I do the decrease is on my right needle, and when I trace it down, I can see that beautiful knit column continuing from that stitch. Knit to the marker, keep on following rows 13, 14, 15, and 16, and we're going to get some nice garter stitch with that main color in the decrease section. I'm on row 14 with my main color. I'm working across that wrong side row. I just knit those stitches, the 14 stitches between my markers right there. On row 14, it says knit to center decrease stitch. So when you're knitting to the center decrease stitch, you need to visualize or use those markers from the previous side right there. This is that center decrease stitch coming from that smooth knit column. They all look bumpy on this side, but you can see how it starts to look really gathered from that decrease. And when you're looking on the wrong side, you might have to flip your knitting like this to go, ooh yeah, that's my center decrease stitch, because we need to purl that stitch. Knit everything else, but you need to purl that center decrease stitch to keep that smooth look on the right side. So that's where those markers may come in handy to help you visualize when you reach that center decrease stitch. Now I'm knitting the 14 stitches in between the markers. And we're starting to get these beautiful stripes. It's going to look really nice with these chevron points. We're really starting to see that decrease point. So one more time, this is the knit 14 as I reach the stitch marker, slip it, and then the pattern says knit to center decrease stitch. Knit. Am I there yet? Oh, nope, not quite yet. It's this stitch right there. Do you see how this stitch that I'm wiggling is coming from this knit column right there? So I need to knit one more, and now I can purl that center decrease stitch. You should have the same number of stitches on either side of that center decreased stitch. If you don't get that purl stitch right in the right place, whenever you're looking at the right side, you might notice a little purl bump in that smooth column, and you can just fix that on the next row. But try to get it on the wrong side. We need to purl that center decrease stitch. Keep on following the pattern repeat rows, rows 9 through 16, and we're going to get these beautiful little ladders and these chevron points in our fabric. Once you have a few stripes of each color, it should look like this. The most important thing with section 1 is that you get the right row repeats, and you have your garter stitch and stockinette stitch. You're going to repeat rows 9 through 16 until you have 14 contrast color stripes, followed by a main color stripe. So you want 14 of these contrast color stockinette stitch stripes. Now, what to do with these funky horizontal ladders? As you knit more and more stripes, you can start to braid and loop these ladders together. And the first step you need to do is to take the I-cord cast on and twist it in half like that, and then pull the next ladder through. So once again, it doesn't matter which way you twist it, whether you twist that I-cord this way or if you twist it this way, but you need to give it one twist, a half twist, and then pop that next ladder through. And once you do that, just keep on pulling each of those ladders through the previous one to get this really fun striped braided loop effect. And you can just do this with your hands. It looks like a single knit stitch. Look how fun that is. So maybe you might not want to do it to the very most recent one that you did, just so you have a little more wiggle room to play with your cast-on stitches for your next stripe. But as you introduce new stripes, you can just keep on pulling that next loop through. And you can do that to all 5 sections. Twist and poke that next ladder through. And then you don't have to do any more twists, just from the back, from behind the loop, pull the new loop through. So you have these alternating color braid stripes. Look how fun that is. That's gonna bring in the section a little more narrow and give you a really pronounced graphic detail. So keep on doing that with each of those sections twist the first I-cord one and then pull each of these loops through, making this chunky, textured knit stitch detail. So much fun. So have fun doing that as you knit your stripes, and that's going to look a little more tidy. And if your increases or your knits and purls aren't exactly as they should be next to those braids, it doesn't matter because those braids hide the neighboring stitches. So focus on your row repeats and your stripes. You want 14 of those, and don't worry too much about your stitch count. You should have 10 new stitches during the first contrast row of every contrast stripe. 10 new stitches are added for each stockinette stitch section, but don't worry if your stitch count isn't adding up. The stitch count doesn't really matter as long as you're seeing these chevron points, you're getting your fun braids. Keep on going, you can do it. I'm ready for the I-cord bind off at the end of section 1. As you repeat rows 9 through 16, keep on repeating those rows until you have 14 contrast color stripes. So this is my 14th contrast color stripe right there. So you want to see that, followed by a main color garter stitch stripe. Pay close attention as you're repeating the rows. Do you see where it says, then repeat rows 9 to 15 once more? That's the final repeat of rows 9 through 15. Next row wrong side is the only time it's that final main color wrong side row where you don't bind off those stitches. This is where I just finished next row wrong side. That's the row where you remove the stitch markers. So follow your pattern closely, do exactly what it says until it looks like this. This is the final next row wrong side. That's the row right before the I-cord bind off. You should have 270 stitches on your needle, but honestly, don't worry about the stitch count. The stitch count doesn't matter. The main thing is that you want to see 14 contrast color stripes. If you're missing a few stitches, even if you're missing 10 or 20 stitches, it doesn't matter, as long as your knitting looks something like this. I-cord bind off. Once you have those 14 contrast color stripes and you completed that last wrong side row, bind off all stitches on the next right side row using an I-cord bind off with main color. Using main color, knit 2 together through the back loop. Slip those 3 stitches onto the left needle. Knit 2 together through the back loop. We're going to repeat that all the way until you have 6 total stitches remaining. Knit 2 together through the back, and slip. I love this I-cord bind off because it's so clean and it matches our cast on and the edges of section 1. As you bind off, always slip those stitches onto the left needle. Don't bind off too tight or too loose, okay? If you're a tight knitter, then maybe you could go up 1 needle size to do the bind off if you feel like your edge is getting really, really tight. But I'm a relaxed knitter, so I'm just knitting as I normally would. Knit 2 together through the back, and slip. That's a nice, you should have a little bit of a stretch. That's a nice edge right there. Keep on going all the way across the row, binding off all of the stitches until you have these 3 stitches, the I-cord remaining, and your last 3 stitches remaining for 6 total stitches. At the end of the I-cord bind off, you should have 6 total stitches, 3 on the right needle, 3 on the left needle. Break your yarn, leaving a tail about this long, and place it onto a tapestry needle. Now look at those 6 stitches. We're going to leave these 3 on the right needle. The 3 on the left needle, we need to reverse their order. So give it a little pinch like this. Take out the needle and put it in like this. There we go. So both of the needle tips are pointing to the right with the purl bumps kissing each other. We're going to graft those 6 stitches together. Using your tapestry needle, go through the front needle purlwise, that first stitch purlwise, leave it on the needle. Go through the back needle stitch knitwise, leave it on the needle. Now go through the front stitch, that front needle stitch knitwise and take it off. Go through the next front needle stitch purlwise, leave it on. The back needle, purlwise, take it off. The next stitch on the back needle, knitwise, leave it on. Now we're going to go into the front needle stitch knitwise off. The next stitch on the front needle, purlwise, leave it on. Back needle, purlwise off. Knitwise, leave it on. And then to finish, we're going to go through the front needle stitch knitwise off and the back needle stitch purlwise off. If you want to weave in your ends, you can go ahead and do that if you want to. I might leave some of my ends to weave in later, but I'm just going to whip stitch this end on the wrong side. So you can just go through the bumps like 10 times or so, should be enough. And once you go through a bunch of bumps on the wrong side, you can just trim that tail of yarn. And whenever you trim your tail of yarn, leave a little bit of space like that. Don't trim too close to the fabric. So if you want to weave in some of your ends, you can go ahead and do that. But I'm going to leave some of mine until later because I might use some of these ends later to sew other possible potential sections, maybe. We'll see what happens. But look at those beautiful loops, and you can go ahead and pull all those loops through, including those last bound off loops. So this was the last main color bind off we did, and you can pull that through and do those fun loops like I showed before. And just leave those hanging out there, okay? I'm gonna show you some things. We might do something to those later. We might just leave them. We'll see, we'll see, we'll see. But just leave them like that for now, and that's your finished section 1 of Twists and Turns. Here is the finished section 1 of Twists and Turns. Lots of fun texture, chevrons, really beautiful graphic color interaction. So if you finished section 1, congratulations. There was a lot going on. So the next section is going to be a little bit easier, I think, okay? So don't quit on me yet. You got to keep on going and make this beautiful shawl. Has a really strong graphic start, and I can't wait to see what we add next to the Twists and Turns. Just leave these loops hanging out at the top and watch back in the video on how to do that loop technique that I showed. It's really, really fun. It was my first time doing this type of technique, and I really like it. So I hope you get addicted to this and maybe try this on some other hats or mittens or some other cool things. It's a really fun textural technique, and I love how it reflects the zigzags of the chevrons. So make sure you get something that looks kind of like this. Don't worry about your stitch count, like I said. It doesn't really matter. You should have 270 stitches at the end, but if you have 250 or 260 or 271, it honestly doesn't matter, okay? The most important thing is the number of stripes. You should have 14 contrast color stripes. So make it look like this. Come back and let's knit section 2 for Twists and Turns later.